Hi, everybody. Before we get started on today's podcast, what I wanted to do was tell you about a unique gift for your grandfather. That unique gift is having a podcast that is all about him. Now, what I'm offering to you is the opportunity to have you and your family be interviewed by me for your very own personal podcast episode. This is a great gift for the family to get together, talk about the cool grandpa in their life and what that cool grandpa has meant to them. This format allows me to help drive the conversation and remove some of the awkwardness that might occur when people are just sitting around a recording device talking randomly about their grandfather. This is a unique opportunity for the family and be interviewed and share fun and exciting ways that their cool grandpa has impacted their lives. What you get with this unique gift is a pre-call discussion about the podcast setup. We'll talk about topics and questions that you want to be sure to highlight, options for the recording, and then we'll have a one-session 45-minute hosted remote call to record your personal podcast. We'll go through the editing process and then deliver your podcast directly to you via Dropbox. Also, there's an option to have a CD burned and then sent out to you as well. I'm offering this unique experience for $267. There's no limit on the number of family members that can participate. If there are several families that share the same cool grandpa, we can include them in this podcast as well. This podcast is only for you and your consumption and would not be made part of the show. Now, if you're ready to get your grandpa something a little bit different, this gift is perfect. It's digital, so it takes up no space. It sits on the computer. And best of all, this gift can be shared amongst your family and friends, and then it can be played over and over again. It's also great, too, if your family is part of the growing family history movement where you want to capture this artifact along with other family heirlooms and then make sure that those get passed down from generation to generation. This is a great snapshot of you and your family in your own voices talking about the impact that your cool grandpa has had on you. So if you're ready to take me up on this offer, please visit my website, www.cool-grandpa.us, or send me an email at greg@cool-grandpa.com. Once I receive your communication, then we'll set up the pre-call discussion and we'll go from there. Again, this is something that's really unique. Your own podcast centered around your family and your very own cool grandpa. Now, on with the show. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Today's guest on the Cool Grandpa Podcast is Diana Bader, and Diana and I actually met 7 years ago at
2013.
Dan Miller's Coaching with Excellence. It turned out we were both up in the Nashville area, and during a break we were walking around where some of the parked cars were, and I think we both noticed that there were tags from Georgia, and then started doing the normal, hey, what part of Georgia are you from? And then it turned out we were about 5 miles apart from each other. Which was kind of interesting. There's people that are 5 miles apart that are meeting up, 300 miles away. So kind of an interesting group. And, then when we got back from that Coaching with Excellence program, we got together and started doing some things to try to promote our coaching programs, which then led us into a nice little coaching group with a number of other individuals. And then Diana and a friend of mine, Becky, introduced them, and those two hit it off and started a podcast called Uniquely Brilliant. And so Diana and Becky have got this podcast going, and along with a web page and Facebook group. And Diana has two sons and was living here in Atlanta, and then recently, well, I guess maybe not so recently, about a year and a half or 2 years ago,
2 years ago. Yeah.
decided to pick up and move from Atlanta to back to outside of Columbus, Ohio, and so has moved back home to be with family and start another chapter of her life. And one of the things too that Diana's doing, along with a number of advocacy for women's health and thyroid health in particular, coaching with children with unique personalities, trying to find their way through high school and through college. Diana is also starting up another chapter of her life with a Positively Brilliant Solutions. And so that web page is going to be launching soon, and we will, of course, put the URL in the show notes for that, as well as a link for the Facebook group for anybody that's interested in checking out Diana. One of the things that is great about Diana is just how positive she is and how full of gratitude she is with everything she does. And her tagline on her Facebook page is audacious. I can't even speak today. Audaciously living life with gratitude, positivity, and joy. And Diana is here today to share with us her experiences of growing up with two grandfathers and the impact that they've each had on her life. And so, Diana, thank you for your time and appreciate you sharing this experience with us. And if you could, please go ahead and give us some background on your grandfathers. Give us a little bit of how they grew up, where they grew up, and then let's talk about some of the influences they had on your life.
Okay. So my paternal grandfather was born in 1904.
Okay.
And that always used to blow my mind just to imagine how much he had seen in his lifetime, because he lived until 2000, or yeah, 2000, and died basically because of a medical error. And my youngest son was born on his 96th, what would have been his 96th birthday.
Wow.
So he had just a interesting life growing up. Uh, um, he was actually living in Cleveland, but he was all over the place. And he started working for the Kresge Corporation, which is the K and Kmart.
Oh, okay.
That's what the K and Kmart stands for. And he would go around the country and open stores, and they moved around quite a bit. And he was a big avid hunter and fisherman, and taught my dad and my uncle, who are twins, how to do that. And um, just I loved being in the outdoors all the time. But he was a very sort of gruff German.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was little, he was a little intimidating.
Okay.
But he didn't want to be called grandpa. And so we had always addressed him as Big Jack.
Got it.
And then my maternal grandfather, he's one of the reasons I moved back to Ohio. He was born in 1911. And I hadn't done the math, but when he graduated from high school, he graduated in 1929 in June. And went off and had these plans for college and a career and all that, and then the stock market tanked.
Right.
And the factories in his hometown shut down. And so I got a lot of the history of some of that. And so he used to, just work odd jobs. And he was telling my kids, the stories of doing a day job and then not having a heavy enough coat and having to walk home and stopping in stores for a few minutes to warm up before he could get home.
Oh, wow.
Just because the times were just so hard. And both of my grandfathers living through the Depression, you could see how the choice that they my paternal grandfather would, he was a big shopper, and so he was always looking for the best deal. And my, they both really worked hard at, and neither one of them graduated from college, but they both worked hard to make very successful careers for each other.
Right. Well,
themselves.
It's amazing too with my grandfathers were born a little bit later, but I mean, your Big Jack was born essentially right around the time the Wright brothers took off from Kitty Hawk and started flight. So both your grandfathers had were in that transition period from horse and buggy to the Model A's and cars becoming more prevalent, to telegraphs and telephones and electric lights. And one of the things that's jumping out at me is just we're in this digital revolution period and have been really for a long time, but you could almost say from the 80s onward with internet and emails and Zoom calls like we're having. And sometimes we dismiss all the technology changes that happened with our grandparents, and your grandparents certainly saw that, had the huge depression that they lived through, managed to survive through, and then took those lessons forward. And for me, I just think back to all the different changes from, they saw people, like I said, horse and buggy transitioning to cars. And then within 60 years, 40 years, you've got people going into space, and you've got people landing on the moon, and just how fast technology must have seemed to have evolved for them. And I don't necessarily know where I'm going with this, but just that it hits me that, your grandfathers, all they knew was rapid change.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and how to pivot. I mean, and adapt to it.
Right.
And move forward despite any adversities. It's, one of the stories I remember hearing when my dad and paternal grandfathers, they lived in Lynchburg, Virginia.
Okay.
When my dad was younger. And that was, I guess, in the 40s. And so the war was going on, and there was that polio with the iron lungs where everybody had to, so there was neighbors that had like iron lungs, and they'd be sitting on their porches. There was just all the things that were very, very different from today.
Right.
But it was always interesting to me to take a history class, because I know you're a big history buff, and hear about the history of the 1900s, because they lived it.
Right.
And so there would be questions, I'd have to ask, about and get firsthand accounts of things.
Yeah. And it's amazing when you have that resource right there, when you're sitting in sixth grade history and they're talking about the Great Depression, and that time period gets 3 or 4 hours in school, but then you turn around and go back, and then your granddad can talk about, oh yeah, we were diving in and out of stores because our coats weren't heavy enough to deal with the Ohio winters. And, there may have even been some dumpster diving for some rotted fruit or something that, looking for something that was, still serviceable, but not for a restaurant. And that becomes very real to somebody that's thinking, oh, this is really abstract. This is, you could almost be talking about the ancient Romans versus the 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Absolutely. Well, and my maternal grandfather, I called him grandpa. Um, he his brother was, I'm going to get the wrong ship, but he was in Pearl Harbor,
wow.
and his ship was one of the first ones to get hit,
Mm-hmm.
and he was actually on duty and had to go to the bathroom and was relieved, and the guy who took over for him was killed.
Wow.
And in my grandfather's effects, my uncle had returned the letter to him. He had saved it, but my grandfather had written him a letter because they found out about this stuff on the radio,
Sure.
and they knew where he was, but they didn't know how he was for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
Everything was being, all the messages were being delivered pretty much by mail,
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
get mail from Hawaii back to Ohio, took a really long time.
Yeah. Because it's,
So and vice versa. So my this letter from my grandfather, it was very hoping that he was alive, and telling him how much everybody was proud of him and everything else.
wow. Wow. Now, how much of a, or let's step back to when you were in elementary school, a young girl,
Mm-hmm.
and then what were some of the impacts and what were some of the memories that you have, during that time period of your grandfathers and the time they spent with you and maybe lessons learned when you were, pretty young?
Well, so Big Jack, since he was part of the Kresge Corporation, one of my favorite things with that was when I was really little, probably even before first grade. Uh, the Kresge store or Kmart store at the time was in his town. It was like in downtown. So it's like one of those old downtown department stores, even
Mm-hmm.
though it was a little small town. Um, and we would go there on Sundays because it was closed on Sundays. And we get to go downstairs into the basement, and the basement is where they had the candy counter and the toys.
Okay.
So he'd give us a little bag, so we could fill up candy and pick what we wanted from behind the candy counter, and pick out a toy to play with for the weekend or when we were staying with them.
Oh, fun.
I know, it was like cool. So I literally was a kid in a candy store
Right.
for a while, and then but then it was interesting because by the time I was in elementary school, I think he had retired, or he retired shortly there, somewhere in those years, and they would travel and spend the winters in Arizona,
Okay.
but they'd always be around at Christmas time, and that was always our big holiday, is because both of my grandparents would still be in town at Christmas, and our Christmas was always just kind of a big family. We had Christmas Eve dinner, and um, we had, and then open presents on Christmas Day, and that was just always, we had a bunch of traditions that we always followed.
Now, was that with both sets of grandparents coming over for Christmas dinner and
Yeah,
kind of hanging out for on Christmas Day?
yeah, they
Oh,
would.
wow.
So that was always nice to have that. My kids didn't get to have that same experience, and I really valued just having that kind of family together because I don't have a very big family to begin with.
Sure. Well, and I think one of the things too is that as everybody is spacing out more and moving around with jobs and school, and again, family sizes, I think we probably look are on the decline. Just in terms of, it used to be 5 or 6 kids was not unusual, and now 2 or 3 kids is kind of the norm. Is missing out on some of those traditions as far as, grandma's always making this dish, mom's
Mm-hmm.
always making this dish, grandpa is always doing this, and so it's kind of unique, and it takes a lot of effort to build back in those traditions when families don't get together quite as often as they used to.
That's very true. Yeah, and my maternal grandfather, um, So my maternal grandmother passed away when I was 7,
Mm.
and then he got remarried to Dottie, and so Dottie was who I kind of grew up with as my grandmother. But um, one of my big elementary school memories with my grandfather is my dad worked for my grandfather for a while in a big building downtown,
Okay.
and we were downtown on a field trip when I was in second grade, and the teacher's giving us this big lecture on the bus before we go into the children's museum
Mm-hmm.
about staying together and, what are you going to do if you get lost? And me, being kind of a smart mouth, raised my hand and said, well, if I go down this street and turn here and go up to the 6th floor, I can go to my grandpa's office. He can drive me home.
Which is probably not the answer that the teacher was looking for. It was probably,
No, probably not.
grab a policeman, stay where you are, get an adult to help you out. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
So,
yeah, and I can't imagine you giving a different kind of smart aleck answer to any of those questions.
yeah, I finally told my grandfather that story a few years ago.
Yeah.
He thought it was pretty funny. But I went down there enough with my dad when he'd work on the weekends and would draw pictures and make stuff and leave them on my grandfather's desk.
Okay. That's awesome. It's a great opportunity too for a small person to go into that office setting.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking how everything right now is becoming virtual and work from home. But it's a big impact to have that opportunity to go into the office building and see where grandpa or dad works or mom works and see the coworkers and things. I think in a way it sets a little bit of an expectation, not necessarily that you have to follow in their shoes exactly and we're going to go work for this company, but I think it sets a little bit of an expectation of like, oh, when I get older and I'm an adult, I'm going to go in and go to work and do something and be productive. And, however that turns out when we become adults, it puts that idea in a young person's head that, hey, this is the adult life. This is where we're going. This is what we're doing. This is how grandpa can afford to take us out to the amusement park, or this is how we can, go get candy and go for a nice dinner or something like that. I think there's some lessons to be learned from just that exposure of young people to that office setting, whether it's a grandfather or father or mom. I'm not trying to discount moms being at the office.
Well, I think for me, that one of the biggest influences, because it's reflected in what I do now, is neither one of my grandfathers graduated from college.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Grandpa Jack did. Anyway, um, so that wasn't the impact on their success. So I can honestly tell people when they have kids that aren't really college material that they can still be successful. That I have firsthand experience watching what that takes.
Oh yeah. Well,
And um,
yeah, and it's
and that it's not necessarily a straight road, but
right, in that there's nothing wrong with pivoting, like you said earlier, with your grandfather's growing up, and then your maternal grandfather graduates high school right into the Great Depression, and so all those plans of going off to college, following a traditional path, or at least having a path opened up for them, suddenly that's over. And now you're in survival and pivot mode, and you're figuring out that, hey, I've got to work off the strengths that I have versus a degree on the wall.
mm-hmm.
And that's something that's pretty powerful and something that really got lost, I think, post World War II with GI Bill and federal loans and everything else, all those good intentions. I think we lost that a little bit with our youth. In terms of, hey, you can go out, be successful, pivot around, do some different things. There's nothing wrong with that. And then use your core strengths. Always be gathering and putting those tools in your toolbox, so to speak, and then executing where you land.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, as you were getting a little bit older and going into kind of the middle school years, which would probably be what, 12 to 14, somewhere in
Yeah.
there, early adolescence. Um, what were some of the lessons and what were some of the memories? Because now you're getting older, so now you can start to participate in some of the traditions and maybe some of the expectations of helping out with Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving, and doing more and having a little bit more of an adult relationship with your grandparents, where you've got a worldview coming in to your own. So there's discussions, there's all sorts of things that instead of being a young girl kind of still absorbing everything, now you've got some critical thinking going on. And how does that relationship start to mature as you get a little bit older?
Um, I think I felt more included. When I was younger, because of the timing, there was always the adults and the kids. And although we didn't necessarily have a kids table because there was just my brother and myself at holidays, um, by middle school, there was a little bit more just interacting. I got to interact a little bit more with each of them without the parents around, or uh, my my grandpa and Dottie, they started a thing with me in middle school. Instead of uh, since my birthday and Christmas are within a few months of each other, we would go out near my birthday and go shopping
Okay.
for birthday and Christmas stuff because I was becoming a clothes horse. and, and go shopping and go to dinner. And then I would get to go home and pick what I got to keep for my birthday. And then they would take the rest back for and wrap it up for Christmas.
Okay.
But they knew I would like it,
Right.
and I would get, and there was a little bit more of a relaxed relationship with them. So I
Mm-hmm.
would do a little bit more sort of joking around um, with like Christmas lists and things too. One of the things I remember doing, we had a big record store here, and my grandpa and Dottie were like, Dottie always wore pearls, grandpa always wore a bow tie,
Okay.
and I would put like really interesting records on like my list just because the image of them walking into the
Oh,
record store and asking for it just made me laugh.
yeah,
I
yeah, like yeah, your
was
grandfather and
kind of,
Dottie going in and picking out the latest Devo album,
well,
or
yeah.
you know,
One of them was the police. I wanted him to say Zenyatta Mandata.
oh, that's
So that just amused the heck out of
that
me.
that's me. Like yeah, like I don't even care about this. I just want him to see him pick out Cinderella or Motley Crue or yeah, the Police.
Exactly. Hmm.
Yeah. Oh, that's a little bit cruel, but I'm sure they got they it sounds like they gave as good as they got. So,
Oh, yes, yes. So, but by this time, um, my dad stopped working for my grandfather and started his own business. And my grandfather had sold his business.
okay.
Um, so he was retiring too. But neither one of my grandfathers like retirement to me is like a non thing
Mhm.
because they didn't stop doing stuff.
Right.
Actually, they probably did even more, and and that continued throughout my life. So so that's when that started. But that was sort of the mindset, is that you don't, that whole, oh, get the brass watch and
Right.
move to Florida. I mean, they would go like winter places, but they never stopped doing stuff.
Yeah.
My grandpa actually sold his company and then bought it back and then stayed on the board until he was like 99.
Okay.
Even, and so and my other grandfather, they would do like at the universities and stuff, they would do like senior classes,
Mhm.
like weekends to learn stuff, and they were doing that all the time. Or they would be, both of them would travel a ton.
That's and that's an awesome lesson to be learning, because just passing on that idea of there's a motor, and you just keep moving, and you keep and pivot around, do something different, but you're always moving around and always searching for that next thing to keep moving. And I'm sure too they got to a point where they didn't necessarily need the money. Maybe there were investments, savings, whatever, but the idea that they probably had growing up that you could just stop and not work was probably a little bit of the security from going through that Depression era, as well as just that internal motor of you're always working, you're always producing, you're always doing something, and not getting to a point where, okay, I'm done, I'm just sitting here, and to your point, just I don't know, sitting around not doing anything. The idea of constantly learning, building skills, getting experiences, it had to have been pretty powerful for you.
Absolutely. I don't, it's funny because at our age now, you hear people that are starting to like talk about retirement, especially with certain jobs that's built in. And I'm always saying, so what are you going to do next? People are like, well, what do you mean? Like,
right.
Oh,
yeah.
It doesn't compute to me to retire. My Big Jack lived until he was almost 96, and Grandpa lived till 107, which I know we'll talk about later. But yeah, so they were doing all the time.
Yeah, and one of the things that's that I find really interesting, and you probably kept up with this too, but guys like Dick Van Dyke, Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks, all of these guys that were kings of comedy back in the 60s and 70s, even in their 90s, they're still out performing. They're still out doing stuff. I mean, Dick Van Dyke, as far as the last time I heard, was still going out and doing shows and still working and doing things. And Mel Brooks still does little videos here and there and contributes. And I think it's a great mindset, because I'm in that situation of I can't imagine not doing something. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be doing something. It's not going to be there's no, I'm going to hit 65, 70 and then that's going to be it. I'm going to get an RV and then just coast around. I'm going to be doing something for somebody. And that's a great lesson that those guys could pass on to you.
The other thing that they both did was they were always active.
Mm-hmm.
And so so for college, to fast forward to, if you don't mind.
No.
Because this was all learning throughout high school, but fast forward to college. So Big Jack, my sophomore year in college, I'm sitting there studying in my dorm room, and I get a call from him. And he's drunk with all of his friends because he just got a hole-in-one.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well,
so
that's a good reason.
He was so excited. He called me at college to tell me, and he was just going on, and he was excited. And his friends were in the background, and there's like this big whole party atmosphere. And I'm sitting there looking around my dorm room, going, "I'm doing something wrong."
Right. Right.
Hold on. I know I haven't paid my dues yet, but this is like so awesome.
Yeah.
I had a couple of friends come by. This is my 82-year-old grandfather, and he's like so wasted, but he got a hole-in-one. And the first thing he wanted to do was call me and tell me about it.
Yeah, and I mean, and did at the time did it kind of click? I mean, maybe after the conversation, like, holy cow, I've got this awesome relationship that my grandfather hit a hole-in-one, is partying with his buddies, and he's thinking about giving me a call and sharing this experience. Not 4 months down the road, not next Christmas, whatever, but like at the moment he's reaching out to his granddaughter to share this exciting news with you.
Yes, I mean, it meant the world to me. Absolute meant the world to me that he thought of that.
Yeah, and that's a pretty powerful lesson, in something even for me to put back in my memory bank as my granddaughter and grandson get older, is the importance of sharing grandpa's wins with the grandkids. You know,
Yeah.
not just hearing that, you know, my grandson hit his first home run or hit his first, 3-pointer in a basketball game or got an A on a test or something, but then flipping it around. And then it's like, hey, guess what, kid? Grandpa just had a big win, and I'm
Yes.
sharing it with you.
Yeah, exactly. It was, I mean, it was definitely one of those things that just, I mean, it has stuck with me the whole time because it meant so much, especially because he was kind of quiet and he's pretty gruff. But to think of me in that moment that that was something he wanted to share with me just really did mean the world to me.
Wow.
But it also, I think it also showed me that, life doesn't stop as you get older. Like I said, my grandparents did not stop.
Hmm.
So, there are still going to be wins in your 80s or 90s or hundreds,
Right.
So, so even on a bad day, if you're not having a win, way down the line, there's still wins. There's still stuff to look forward to forever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's that mindset of, keep going, keep chugging along, keep learning, keep developing, keep doing new stuff, and just never stop. I think that's one of the lessons that I'm learning as I'm getting older is that
Hmm.
what's that old phrase? Rolling stone gathers no moss. Hey,
Yes.
if I stop, I'm going to get rusty joints. My back's going to hurt more. My, whatever when I need to get up and get going. Versus mentally, physically, just keep action, keep going, and that's an awesome lesson. Now,
Yeah.
go ahead. No, go
No,
ahead.
and my other grandpa always played golf too. So the one thing I remember, like consciously deciding in um, college was, that was something, they didn't have the time to do that when they were younger, and I could actually consciously decide that that was a sport I could take up at 60.
Sure. Yeah.
So I haven't reached it yet, so I haven't even started playing golf yet. It's still
Well,
in my future.
right. Well, and you've got some pretty good golf courses in and around Columbus too that you can jump on
I
and learn.
do.
Yeah. And if nothing else, your kids can download Top Golf for you on the computer, and you can play that.
Well, we actually have a big Top Golf here, so I can I have a gift card because I promised myself I'd at least go take Top Golf lessons if nothing else.
Yeah, at least figure out how to hit some of the targets and things off the
Hmm.
little driving range. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, what are some of the other lessons, and what were some of the other impacts that your grandfathers had on you as you were getting into early adulthood through college and post college? And how did that relationship also change a little bit too?
Well, so I was still moving around quite a bit, but one of the things was when my now ex-husband, but when we were talking about getting engaged, he was saying something about asking my dad. I said, "You have to ask my grandfathers first." So we flew to Florida, and I made him ask my grandfathers.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Uh-huh. Um, yeah. So yeah. I mean, I had such respect for both of them that I wanted to include them in that.
Right.
One of the things. So my um, paternal grandmother passed away when I was in high school, and my grandfather didn't get remarried until I was in college. And one of the things that was fun with that was he brought home a picture uh, of what was to be my future step grandmother-in-law, or grandmother, and he was showing me these pictures, and my dad was sitting there, and he was asking my advice on what I thought of her. And my dad was sitting like on the couch, and he's like, "What are you looking at?" "Never you mind, Junior. Never you mind. I want your daughter's opinion."
Right.
Like, so they started. We developed this relationship where it was a little bit more give and take,
Okay.
and they continued to do things great. Continued and continued. I mean, my Big Jack, they both were very avid readers,
Mm-hmm.
both fiction and nonfiction and business, and they kept up with a lot of the latest trends. And so that you never stop learning was one of the biggest impacts. I mean, my even when my grandfather, when Big Jack, I know for sure, I remember going to his house, and there would be like a stack of magazines, and he had read them cover to cover.
Yeah.
And he had, I think, like 5 or 6 different newspapers like delivered. You know, the local one, Wall Street Journal, Times, and he would read those cover to cover. He was all they always knew what was going on around the country, around the world, around the town. So
Yeah. Well, and I know for sure that rubbed off on you, because I know how many certifications and courses and everything that you've been doing just in the times that I've known you. And I think that's also one of the ideas that's missing, or that I think is missing today, is this idea of multiple points of view. And it comes out when you're talking about multiple newspaper subscriptions, is that you have the local news and those writers that live in the community, and how national events and economy and world events affect the local community. But then you have probably East Coast, West Coast papers with their writers, and their spin isn't what I guess more opinion or influence or perspective. You're getting these different perspectives, and if you're a discerning reader, you pick and choose those things that impact you, and then that helps create your view. But it also gives you a sense of, oh, okay, this is how these events are impacting that person and how they're sharing that story, and this is how these events are impacting that person. And they're not necessarily wrong, even though they may be conflicting, but they're different points of view that you can at least respect and at least take in. And I think today we're so, at least in my opinion, become so monotone in how we get information and how we pull things together, that I think that's a great lesson to be learning, is have multiple sources, and even if they conflict or they're not necessarily with your worldview, be reading about it, because there may be pieces of information and nuggets in conflicting opinion that may change your perspective a little bit, or at least give you the idea to respect a differing view. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely how I see the world, is very open-minded.
And I think too, it just shows me, and again, not just with this interview, but other interviews, how small little habits and small things that grandparents do get picked up by the grandchildren. Whether it's how they treat their wives, how they treat their children, how they react to conflict, how, so many little things that as the person involved, you don't think about it. But the kids, even as adult, are constantly viewing and constantly looking at that example.
Yeah, and a good example of that too is, since both of my grandfathers got remarried, because their spouse, my grandmother's, died. Watching those second relationships was really interesting, because they were second relationships without family. So it was just that relationship and how they handled things, because both of my step grandmothers were different and had some different beliefs than my grandfathers did. So one of the things that Big Jack and Lucille, who he married, would do is, they didn't like the same kind of movies. So they would go to the movie theater and pick like a time, and they go watch separate movies. And a lot of times they take friends with them, and the ladies go watch one movie and the guys go watch another, and then they meet back for dinner and discuss the movies.
Okay.
But that way they got to see what they wanted, and nobody, and they were both happy.
Yeah, and that's, sorry, I was going to say, and that's an important lesson, because I think the assumptions that we go into marriage and relationships with is we all have to still like the same thing, and that
Hmm.
if we don't go see the movie together, then there's something wrong, or there's an underlying conflict. And it's like, not necessarily. It just means I like this kind of movie and you like that kind of movie, or I like this kind of ice cream and you like that kind of ice cream, and there's nothing else to it, and we still have a rock solid relationship.
Yep. And with Grandpa and Dottie, like Dottie was Catholic, and so she would go to mass usually on Saturdays,
Mm-hmm.
and then they would meet up. And usually, because like I said, both my grandparents, they had like a schedule you'd not believe. They were always had something going on. So she would go to mass on Saturday so they could go do whatever they had to do Saturday night. And then Sunday morning, Dottie wasn't much of a morning person, so she could leisurely get ready Sunday morning while my grandfather ran to his church,
Mm-hmm.
and then, do brunch or whatever, play golf, whatever else they had going on the
Right.
rest of the day.
Right.
And so watching those relationships and seeing how um, mature relationships could be so positive was huge.
Yeah. Did now, how did that affect, I guess, or what? How did that mold some of your views with your relationships? You know, um, did you find you had a little bit more give and take? Well, yeah, but did you find that there
Sorry.
there were a little bit more like give and take, or there's a little bit more of like, okay, fine, you go do that. I don't care. It's not a big deal. I'm going to go do this. Um,
I don't think I've found that relationship yet.
okay.
I think it's made me pickier, maybe, um, because that's something I aspire to.
Right. Well, and I do, and little bell went off in my head where it's like, I don't think it's pickier. I think it's higher standards.
That's probably.
And in that, I spoke to some other people too, where they said, some of those relationships with their grandparents and seeing how their grandparents, grandma and grandpa worked with each other and related to each other created a little bit of a higher standard for their own relationships where
Hmm.
no, I want a guy that treats me like my grandfather treats my grandmother,
Yes. Yeah.
and which is
I,
important because it's not just seeing how mom and dad interact, which is huge because it's day in and day out, but it's also here's my grandfather who I look up to and respect and adore and everything else, and this is how he's treating his wife.
I think the word that comes to mind is respect. There was such a deep respect for each other, in both of their relationships, that I don't think when in your youth you recognize how important that is.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you start really watching it and discerning it and looking back, it's like, oh yeah, the respect is a huge thing.
Right. Right. So as we start to wrap up the conversation, I did want to talk a little bit about the list that you shared with me, which is called "How to Live to 107," which I think was put together by your grandfather, or put together for your grandfather.
It was put together for my grandfather. So when I left Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
and moved back up here, part of the reason was for my grandpa,
Right.
because he was still alive, and he was getting a little more ill, and his main caregiver was ill, and she actually passed away in the transition. So I was at a place where my youngest had just graduated from high school, and I had the freedom to go up and hang out with him. There wasn't anybody from my mom's side of the family that lived nearby. My aunt actually lives up in and still does, up in Rochester, New York, and would come down every so often to see him. About every 6 to 8 weeks
Sure.
to do things. So I like, you know what, I can do this. I can be up there, and on visiting to take my son up for school, the conversations were just so fun. I'm like, this will be great. I'm really kind of looking forward to this.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I did was I would be spending time with him or traveling, and everywhere we go, somebody would ask him how, what does it take to live to be 100? He was 106. He turned 107 when I was here. But what does it take to get to that? And so he would rattle off these answers,
Yep.
and I would keep track of them in my phone. And the card actually came. That's was my eulogy.
Okay. And folks, we'll put a copy of this list in the show notes on the website. So if you're listening to this on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever, go ahead and click on over, go to the website, find the episode, and this list will be on there too. And do you want to go through the list, or do you want me to read off the list?
I can do it if you want me to.
Oh, sure.
Or do you want to take turns? Do you want to?
Why
don't you do it and then ask me any questions you have about
it? So first one is be genuinely interested in people. And, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. But, to me, it's get outside of yourself. You're not the center of things. Be interested in what other people are doing, what their experiences are. Stay outside of yourself in that one. Anyway, that's my interpretation.
Yeah, well, and one of the things with that too is that he really got to know people.
Mm-hmm.
So he could tell you a lot about somebody. He would actually genuinely listen. So if you talk to him, no matter if you were a little kid or an adult or whatever, he would genuinely listen and hear you. And that's where a lot of that came from.
Yeah. Work hard. I think that's kind of we've hit on that. And like what you do, man, and that's a huge one, because we all get sometimes trapped into staying too long at the party, so to speak, whether it's work or relationships or whatever it might be. Is I think do that gut check every once in a while, and do what you like to do. Now that doesn't mean something gets rough and you just throw up your hands and walk away, but it's doing a gut check every once in a while, and checking in with yourself. Do you like what you do?
Yeah, exactly. And it's also, if you know that you need to transition, find that thing that you like to keep it until you can transition out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important. Don't just quit your day job because you're frustrated.
Because you don't like it.
Right. Because the next one might take a little while to find.
You know that.
Let's see. Do something to make yourself stand out. So this is where, it jumps all over with the work that you've done with Uniquely Brilliant and your own coaching and everything else. And especially the work with the kids that may be not on a college track, is there's skills, there's something about you that's different from other people. The way you learn, the way you interact with folks, the way you do whatever it is you do, and probably magnify that. Don't be afraid to put a magnifying glass to what's unique about you.
True. The other thing is, so my grandfather always wore a bow tie.
Okay.
And he started wearing a bow tie because somebody had given him this advice. And when he got into the insurance business, and they said, somebody told him, they're not going to remember your name. And he said, or maybe he was telling somebody that, they may not remember my name, but they're going to remember, hey, he's the insurance guy with the bow tie.
Right.
And so, and that's what he always did. That was like his little thing. So
before Orville Redenbacher was selling popcorn, or afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember him ever not having a bow tie. I actually have, my request was to have most of his bow ties. So
nice.
I have a bunch of his bow ties. I'm going to make a wreath out of it.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Help other people. And I think that kind of goes a little bit back to number one, where be interested in people. And the other one is, this one dovetails nicely into when you can help other people, emotionally, financially, however that is appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, through the lives both of my grandfathers lived, there were times that they needed help. I mean, there were some hard times there.
Yep.
And so to always remember that especially if you were helped, then when you're at the place where you can help others, to always do that.
Yep. Let's see. Always smile. So, just a great one. Nobody's going to be attracted to somebody that's always negative or always has a frown on their face, and always smile, because the smiles are contagious. I do believe it. I do believe in that. So sometimes that smile just gets somebody else going and picks them up a little bit, and you have no idea what you just did.
It's the best form of random act of kindness.
Absolutely. The next one we've talked about a little bit: stay physically active, whether it's learning to play golf at 60 or being out on the course when you're in your 80s, or kayaking, hiking, camping, whatever it is. Keep the rust off, because once that rust and moss starts to gather on our old bones, it's hard to shake it off.
Well, and it's funny because it stays so much with you that even when he was in the hospital and on his last days, he was moving his arms and doing his routines.
Oh, great.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. The next one is find a good woman and treat her well. So definitely good advice there. And also, go ahead and find a good man and treat him well too. That's important as well. So,
well, I think his theory was, especially because he's old school, is if you treat her well, she's going to treat you well.
Yeah, that's that old happy wife, happy life.
Exactly.
Right. So, and then always have a positive view of things, which, of course, this jumped out to me with the old Monty Python song. Always look on the bright side of life.
Okay.
Excuse me. But yeah, super. And I just, throughout the whole conversation, it's just, I can't help but feel that your grandfathers had just that positive view of things. I mean, like we said, growing up when they did, coming through depression, coming through a world war, coming through Korea and everything else they saw, it sounds like they just always had that positive view that, hey, there's an opportunity around the corner. I'm going to get it. I'm going to get there. So, yeah.
Well, I think that the overall theme that I remember hearing was, the alternative.
Right. Definitely. Because if you don't keep that positive view, it's so easy to see how the negatives all stack up and quickly jump into the whole, of course my car didn't start this morning because it's me, it's my life. That's how it happens. Of course I bounced that check on the same day my car didn't start because that's me, that's my life. Of course this didn't, I think the negativity spirals out so much faster than sitting back and reviewing all the positive that jumps into a person's life as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
And then probably the most important one on the list is a little Jack Daniels doesn't hurt. And do you want to provide what your grandfather's best recipe for consuming some Jack Daniels is?
Yeah, well, every night at 5:00 was happy hour.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would have his Jack Daniels on the rocks, maybe splash of water, and he'd have one or two. So I put that into the whole thing because one of his big things was do everything in moderation.
Sure.
So it's not like he was going to drink the bottle of Jack Daniels.
Right.
It was, have a glass or two. And that's it.
Well, and if I remember right too, and this may tie in, but your old neighborhood before you moved down to Atlanta, you guys, your neighbors used to get together for a little happy hour from time to time too, right?
Yeah, we used to have sewer parties.
Yeah.
My mom and my neighbors started that. So, yeah, she must have learned that from my grandpa too. But
So, yeah, I mean, a little libation, getting to know your neighbors a little bit, and everybody coming out, and then it's kind of check your worries at the door, and we're going to come out here and have a little bit of a good time, and socialize and keep those connections strong between neighbors.
well, yeah, exactly. What she would do is they would come up with like the drink of the week. And what's really funny is my neighbor's daughter was doing this for a long time in her neighborhood. Um, but they would do that, and then they'd sit on the sewer
Mm-hmm.
and as people were coming home from work, and then they'd park and they'd make them a drink, or they'd go home and change and come back with one, or come back with food, and before long everybody was hanging out at the top of the street,
Yeah,
um, for the evening.
yeah, the neighborhood social hour.
It was terrible when you were dating, but hi, not only are you meeting my parents, but you're meeting my entire street.
Right.
But if you can put up with that,
It's a good filtering system. So,
very quickly.
yeah. Well, Diana, thank you so much again for jumping on and sharing the stories and the impact that your grandfathers have. And, is there any lasting story or anything that jumps out at you that you would like to share before we wrap this up?
Um, you were talking earlier about technology. One of the things that popped into my head uh, was my grandpa. We were down visiting with my sons,
Mm-hmm.
visiting him, and my kids had just gotten Game Boys and were mastering some games, and my grandfather wanted to see it. So my older son, who was probably 4 or 5 at the time, was showing him how to play one of his games,
Yeah.
and my grandfather beat him.
Oh,
And
nice.
my son grabbed his game back and said, "Okay, that's enough."
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, my grandfather was kind of cracking up, but yeah, um, it's so all that learning, even just being introduced to something, even as crazy as a video game, um, was still helpful for him to beat my son.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Diana, I do appreciate everything that you've shared with us, and it just goes to prove and keeps reiterating just what a positive impact grandpas can have on granddaughters and grandsons as well, and the family unit as a whole, whether it's helping to build those holiday traditions or just making sure that there's safe and appropriate relationships within the family unit. And I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.